Ich habe noch eine Frage zu
Yeah,
diese Fed, von der Sie. So I was wondering this Fed, when you made this connection to that there's a Fed in this specific town or like city. Does this mean like the Federal Reserve? Is this like so it's like
yes.
the bank?
Yes.
It's not like a military, like nicht die Bundespolizei, sondern the Fed. So why do you think that would be? Because that's kind of strange. I mean, the Fed is basically organized like it's made up by a set of privately owned banks, and so this is like. Do you think that specific branch of the Fed is then maybe involved or like trying to, or is this like just a? I mean, do you find this is significant that especially in those cities that has taken place this destruction? Like more than in other places?
So I believe that everything that is happening right now, the reason you and I are meeting today is because we are part of something called the Going Direct Reset. Mm-hmm. And the Going Direct Reset was a plan prepared at BlackRock by a group of central bankers and was presented for voting to the G7 central bankers on August 22nd, 2019. I just put a link. We just published a big presentation by John Titus on the Going Direct Reset. I believe, people talk about Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset. That's just a distraction. That has nothing to do with the real train tracks of what's being done, the real train tracks of the Going Direct Reset. So this is a plan by the central bankers. And that plan basically induced a takedown of the entire global economy. And it induced that takedown at the same time that massive amounts of money were printed and circulated out to a variety of players who are now free to take that money and basically buy up tremendous assets. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's all explained in the Going Direct Reset. And again, I'm happy to provide. That's subscriber-only content, but I'm happy for anybody in the committee to provide a complimentary subscription. And I would really strongly recommend you read that, as well as State of Our Currencies, which is an overview of not only what the reset is, but why they need to evolve the currency systems. So I think that's what's driving the train here. Mm-hmm. Now, what we are seeing as part of that is a consolidation of.
Yeah, Wolfgang?
Oh, no, I have a question if she's finished.
No, so let me just finish. This is part of a. So what happened was the central bankers voted on the Going Direct Reset. They went into the markets in September, and in State of Our Currencies and Going Direct, you'll see the chronologies that sort of lay the whole thing out.
What September is that? Last year or 2019?
That was September 2019.
That's what I thought, because there was a huge financial crash which was covered up, and we thought that COVID or Corona was invented as a distraction for that. But
it wasn't a crash, it was a takedown.
Aha.
Okay? Mm-hmm. We all have to stop using words like depression or collapse. This is a takedown. Okay. It's not a downturn, it's a takedown. Mm-hmm. And if you read the Going Direct, you'll understand how that works. Now, that process is moving toward, you're trying to extend the reserve currency system. So you're trying to keep the existing system going, but then you're trying to bring in a new system. And that new system is a system that is an all-digital system that gives you complete control. So it's no longer a currency as we know its system. It's a financial transaction system, which is a little bit like a credit at the company store, and which I would describe as a slavery system because it gives you complete control. And there are two issues here. One is the financial transactions, but the other is the digital data, because in a digital system, the data about money is worth more than money. And so you have to look at this on two tracks, both the intelligence data track and then the money track. Now, what they're trying to do is very ambitious, and a lot of this is being prototyped, like the cryptos are being prototyped, but It all depends on an all-electrical grid. It's one of the reasons they want to get off gas and oil, because the control system requires an all-electrical system. And my guess is if there is a reason why the riots are happening in the Fed cities, it's because the first logical place to build out that grid is in the Fed cities. It could also be because of a variety of those things related to this. That's where the most upside opportunity is. But my guess is it's because if you go to an all crypto system, making sure you have the smart grid in the Fed locations is very, very important.
So I think we observe now that the German finance minister, that he started when the beginning with the crisis, he started expending lots of money to many people who were following the whole plan. So there was a lot of money for science, but only for those scientists who tried to say what the government wants to hear. And there was lots of money given to the hospitals who were emptying their beds for future COVID-19 cases. So there was a lot of money mobilized and given to the doctors who were testing. They got 15 euros for one cotton wool test, and so lots of money was suddenly spent. I had the impression that money was just printed to bribe all those people who were just saying yes to what is happening. And and so they just print the money. They don't care. They just print, and they can bribe everyone, and they can, if someone is critical, just give them money. Right. And they will stop being critical. Right. I think this happens even with NGOs. This is happening with all people showing up and saying, I could be critical. If you pay me if you give me some money, I will stop.
Right. So what you're doing, you have independent producers. I'm going to grossly oversimplify. You have people who can print money and people who can earn money. They can produce. Okay. What you're trying to do is bust these people so they're financially dependent, and then they need your printed money, and then they have to do what you say. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and here's what's important to understand. If you understand the consolidation of the financial coup, you're watching the central bankers take control of the treasury departments. So they've had the sovereign governments issue more and more bonds, and the sovereign governments are now dependent on the central banks to buy the bonds. And now the central bankers are moving in and essentially putting their people in place to control the treasuries. And so you have central banks that are owned privately by private people who are invisible relatively, now taking control not just of the money creation, but of the governments that depend on the central bank to buy their bonds. Now, the big secret in all of this, and one of the reasons they're so aggressive right now, is if you understand how the system works, the reality is we don't need them.
Yeah.
We don't need them to create our money. Yeah. We don't need them to control our data. We don't need them to run our governments. We don't need any of that. Mm-hmm. Now, what has happened, and which is why it's so important, Wolfgang, what you brought up, for the last 30, 40 years, they have always been able to buy most of the dissenters or the independent efforts against them with money. In other words, they have, in the democracies, they have bought the population off again and again.
They bought even Transparency International.
Right. And the question, so just if you look at my journey over the last 30 years, whenever allies show up, my question is, okay, how are they going to buy that person away? What are they going to... and they do. No, they buy almost everybody away. And the problem is if you have an ally who's got 3 young children and is trying to, manage a household, and they come and they offer them, a couple $100,000 a year doing something for Harvard, off they go because they have a fiduciary obligation to their family. So these guys, that's why we did the deep state tactics. They're fabulous at buying almost everybody. And it's a very rare person that they can't buy. And one of the things they've done with all the money they print is to try and buy everyone into institutions and organizations that keep them busy and away from the real power lines. Yeah. The beauty of what's happened now is suddenly, I was in Basel for the World Freedom Alliance, and there was one wonderful member who said, friends are turning up everywhere. Because we've reached a point where I think you have a lot of intelligent thinking people who realized, wait a minute, some things are not a function of price. And if you look at what the destruction of human civilization and the destruction of all that's sacred or wise, what these guys are doing is, what we're selling down the river here is the future of human civilization. And, and there are too many intelligent, educated people who know that that's a liquidation. That's not a business.
Also Wolfgang had,
I think it's very encouraging what you just said, that we don't need them.
We don't need them.
I think the most important thing is when I imagine, I have a dream, I may say it like this, when the people just take off the mask, when they just open their shops, when they just go on doing what they always did, those people would stand there with open mouth, wouldn't understand, they would no longer be important. We could just go on living as we did before. We have to change a lot of things.
Yes.
But we could do this in a democratic way, and if we have some time to do it, we have to change things. We have to hinder them to do such things happen again. So the decentralization of money, I think, is very important.
Yes.
The decentralization of health is very important.
Yes.
There are many things we can arrange in a regional perspective, and that. If you have it in a regional perspective, this is just important for democracy, because democracy only functions when there is transparency. Right. When you understand what's happening, when you can go to the one who makes a failure and say, hey, stop with this. This is my responsibility, it's our responsibility, stop this. But this is not possible if the system is too big.
Right.
You don't understand.
So let me bring up 3 points, because I agree with everything you just said, and you're at the heart of the matter. The first thing is, the good news is if you look at how the planet and the economy works, their system is destroying the economy, and there's plenty for everybody if we run things in a civilized way. So there's no reason why poverty is not necessary. No. So there are solutions. There are many different models and systems that can work, but they can't work without the rule of law, and they can't work if you put psychopaths in charge.
Yeah.
So I never want to have a conversation about, socialism versus capitalism, because if you have good leadership in a place and you have a consensus on what model you want to use, there are thousands of models that'll work. So that's right. But the third thing, and this is the unanswered question that I don't know, and this is our risk that we have to deal with. It is clear that people doing this are building a multi-planetary civilization. They've put fantastic amounts of money, I believe, into investing in space and an underground infrastructure to facilitate what they want to do in space. The trillions of dollars that have gone missing through the financial coup have gone somewhere. And the question is, where are they going and why are they going? Now, there are millions of theories. I have no idea what's true. But the reality is our planet is run by physical force, and that physical force ultimately is driven by who controls in space. And so if you look at the invisible technologies that can be delivered from space, the weaponry, it's very, very powerful. And so if they are few and we are many, but if we organize and defy whoever it is who controls space, we need to be able to deal with that.
You're talking about 5G being used as a means of, for example, controlling us through whatever is being vaccinated, something like that.
It's not just control, but the ability to use electromagnetic weapons to drive your car off the highway or blow your car up, or use the rod of God to blow up your village or engage in, so now I get into an area of speculation, which is outside my area of expertise. But I'll give you a perfect example. And I'd like permission to tell a little bit of a long story, just because I think examples help. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So in 2007, I was helping a client who wanted to buy a world bond fund. And I don't like most world bond funds, so it was a long search. And I found 2 world bond funds from a very good sponsor. And one of them had 15% of their money in Indonesian sovereign bonds. No, it must have been earlier because it was 2004. It's somewhere in there. And you'll know soon when it was. Anyway, so we found this world bond fund, and he made a very large investment because he wanted to buy something and just put it away, get the yield, don't worry. Very shortly after he made the investment, the fund dropped 15% overnight for no reason that we could figure. There were no change in interest rates. There was no bad news about the sponsor, about the fund, nothing. And there was massive insider trading. And if you looked at the trading that was going on, I've never seen anything like it. I've been an investment banker for decades. I've dealt with billions and hundreds of billions of dollars of bonds. I was floored. I was getting on the phone, talking to the sponsor, trying to find out what in the world was going on. No answers, complete stonewall. A week later, the tsunami in Indonesia happens. And I realized they knew. They knew there was going to be a tsunami more than a week ahead of time. Now, and I sat down and I said, how do you, and then the patterns of disaster capitalism that hit in Indonesia, right after the tsunami hit were, it was clearly there was either somebody was anticipating it and doing it at active war, or somebody was taking tremendous advantage of what had happened. Now, that brings up the question of how many of these natural disasters are weapons versus natural disasters. And I don't know. But whoever has the power to do something like that, we're up against people who use significant amounts of force, and they use invisible weaponry, and they do a lot from space. And so, if you look at why a prime minister would do something that is in the interest of the central banks and against his own people, it's more often than not, I believe, because he's in a variety of different squeezes, and one of them relates to this kind of weaponry. So I would just say the good news is the wealth potential is phenomenal. The bad news is we're on a planet that is controlled by force, and we need to face, my pastor used to always say, if we can face it, God can fix it. We have to understand the physical force that we're up against.
Okay, let me translate that. And one question, however, what do you think about the tsunami? I mean, there's 2 ways of explaining this. I mean, not the tsunami, but the tsunami. Do you think it was triggered by someone, or do you think there was insider trading because somebody had the means through whatever technology is up there in space to foresee this?
It had to be one or the other. I've had people who tell me they can anticipate an earthquake. They can predict an earthquake, fairly far into the future. So I'm assuming it could have been either. Given the patterns I've seen that have supported and protected the dollar, I'm convinced that some of these natural disasters are being induced. And that is one of the great powers behind the dollar system.
Okay. Also, Wolfgang hatte eben nochmal gefragt, dass er das Gefühl hatte, dass über die letzten Jahre, das ist dann von Frau Austin-Fitz präzisiert worden, über die letzten 30 bis 40 Jahre ist das tatsächlich so gelaufen, Kritiker des Systems, die eigentlich in der Lage wären, es zu durchschauen, weggekauft wurden. Dass man einfach nur Geld gedruckt hat, Moneyprinting wie verrückt, und jedem, der als Kritiker hätte gefährlich werden können, genug Geld gegeben hat, damit er die Fronten wechselt. Sie sagt aber auch, dass gerade in letzter Zeit auffällig ist, vorher war es so, dass immer wieder Allies, also Weggefährten, die Unterstützer waren, praktisch weggekauft waren. Also wenn einer 3 Kinder hat und irgendwie eine gute Ausbildung hat und dann wird ihm ein Job in Harvard angeboten für viel Geld, dann wird er das machen, wenn er sich dann sicher fühlt. Sie sagt, das hat sich aber jetzt geändert, weil immer mehr ihrer Freunde gemerkt haben, dass es Dinge gibt, die man nicht kaufen kann. Und das scheint jetzt diese Situation zu sein, in der wir uns befinden, zumindest nach ihrer Einschätzung, dass immer mehr Menschen merken, dass das, worum es wirklich geht, das Menschsein ist und dass die Dinge, die hier mit viel, viel Geld gekauft werden, eben teilweise nicht das ersetzen können, was ansonsten was man eben nicht kaufen kann. Wichtig ist, glaube ich, noch, dass sie mehrfach darauf hingewiesen hat, dass wir uns in einer Transition Period befinden zwischen dem alten System, wo man noch versucht, das alte am Laufen zu halten, damit wir uns in Sicherheit wiegen, aber das neue System, was dann nur elektronisch oder elektrisch läuft, wo man uns dann eben Geld zuteilen will, dass dieses System noch nicht installiert ist. Und in der Zwischenzeit wird nach ihrer Einschätzung läuft es so, dass mit sehr viel Geld der produktive Teil der Wirtschaft gekauft wird. Irgendwann wird dann das Gelddrucken beendet werden und dann kann man mit dem Geld, was man vorher für sein Geschäft bekommen hat, das werden viele Leute mit Erschrecken feststellen, leider gar nichts mehr anfangen. Sie hat aber außerdem einen positiven Outlook, beziehungsweise erst hat sie noch ein Beispiel dafür genannt, einen positiven Outlook. Sie sagt, das System, was wir jetzt haben, das zerstört die Wirtschaft. Das System, was wir jetzt haben, brauchen wir aber auch gar nicht. Und wenn das klar ist, dass die Leute, die Geld drucken, um andere Leute aufzukaufen, völlig irrelevant sind, sondern im Gegenteil gefährlich sind für uns und für die Wirtschaft gefährlich sind. Wenn das klar ist, dann haben wir den ersten Schritt, um aus dieser Nummer rauszukommen. Auf der anderen Seite sagt sie aber auch, muss man sich darüber im Klaren sein, dass die Gegenseite über sehr viele Möglichkeiten wegen des vielen Geldes, was hier uns letzten Endes geklaut worden ist, Trillions of Dollars sind geklaut worden im Rahmen der Finanzkrise zum Beispiel, die sie als erstes betrachtet hat. Mit diesem Geld ist irgendwas gemacht worden und sie sagt, da bestehen insbesondere Möglichkeiten über, wer den Weltraum beherrscht, der kann von oben mit irgendwelchen Technologien auch Dinge bewirken, zum Beispiel Erdbeben vorhersehen oder Erdbeben sogar verursachen. Sie sagt aber auch selber mehrfach, das ist jetzt Spekulation. Das ist aber ihr Gefühl und das, was sie gesehen hat in ihrer politischen Karriere, bestätigt sie darin. Also, um es nochmal zusammenzufassen, es ist so, dass immer mehr Leute merken, dass irgendwas nicht stimmt und immer mehr Leute merken, dass die Meinung, dass man mit Geld alles bezahlen kann, falsch ist, weil man eben das, was uns jetzt gerade fehlt, nicht mit Geld bezahlen kann. Wir müssen andererseits aufpassen, dass wir uns darüber im Klaren sind, dass die Gegenseite, die zwar nicht aus sehr vielen Leuten besteht, aber die über sehr viele Möglichkeiten verfügen, dass diese Gegenseite nicht unterschätzt werden darf. Trotzdem sagt sie, wenn wir, die wir ja die Mehrheit sind, vermutlich auch die Klügeren sind, wenn wir uns verbünden und gemeinsam an dieser Sache arbeiten, dann wird es klappen. So I gave them the positive outlook that you just ended with. On the one hand, it's more and more people are beginning to realize that money can't buy everything, in particular not what people really want. And on the other hand, we have to be aware of the fact that the other side is very powerful, that they have lots of means, in particular when they control space.